Good, good morning. Thank you for joining us for this press conference. I'm Joe Cirusolo. I'm the Executive Director of the Connecticut Association of Public School Superintendents. I'm joined by Patrice McCarthy, who is the Deputy Executive Director and General Counsel for the Connecticut Association of Boards of Education, and Dave Lenahan, who is the Director of Government Relations for the Connecticut Association of School Business Officials. And if you need to know what those all are, I'll give it to you afterwards. We're here to engage in a conversation that's already started about what the state budget will be for next year. We're not here to attack any individual or anything like that, but there are certain aspects of the conversation that have already started about which we're concerned, and actually one about which we're pleased to see that it's part of the conversation. The things we're concerned about are, first of all, the total amount of state money that is being proposed to go to education in the state of Connecticut. As you can see from the sheet we have given you, it's about somewhere between $350 or $400 million decrease from the state allocation for this year. That's going to cause some major problems across the state in just about every school district. There are programs that are presently being offered that will not be offered. Some of the things that are on the chopping block are all-day kindergarten. There's going to be some support services for students that will not be offered, that are being offered now. And there are, by the way, students who need that support in every school district in the state, not just in a few of them. There will be some curricular and extracurricular activities that will be affected, and the maintenance of the buildings will be affected as well. So the total amount is a problem. The distribution formula that's being suggested is also a problem because it increases funding for about 30 municipalities, and that means school districts, and decreases it for about 130. We're concerned about that because we are convinced that every kid in this state deserves financial support from the state. We're concerned about it because when you have 130 communities not getting something and 30 do, that's a divisive kind of proposal. We already have enough divisiveness in this country and to a certain extent in this state. We do not need to continue it. And it also seems to penalize towns that have efficiently managed their finances. Comments have been made about fund balances. Well, they're there because the towns have managed well, and we don't think they ought to be penalized for having managed well. When it comes to the proposal that's being made for a separate special ed grant that is then going to be distributed on a 0 to 55% ratio depending on the wealth of the community, we're very concerned about that ratio because what it says is there are going to be communities that get nothing to fund a state mandate. And it's a huge mandate. The average cost per special ed kid in the state of Connecticut is twice the average cost for kids who are not special ed. Everybody should get some help with that. We're concerned about the proposal to have communities now contribute towards the teacher retirement system. This is a state system. Teachers pay 6.5% of their salaries into it. The state had committed years ago to match that, and now they're trying, at least one proposal would take a third of that and ask the towns to do that. And as you can see from the information we gave you, that's a $408 million item in the first year, and then more after that. In terms of what we're looking for, we would be very pleased if one way or the other we could get level funding for education in the state, what the state appropriated last year, appropriate again this year, change the distribution formula so that everybody gets something. We realize that the communities that are not wealthy need more money, and we have no problem with that. We're not trying to take money away from them. But what we're saying is that everybody should get something, and if you increase the appropriation and level fund it, there will be money there to give something to everybody. All of that, I guess, is sort of on the negative side. One area, though, that we're pleased to see as part of the conversation is the area of mandate relief, and Patrice is going to talk about that.
Good morning. There have been many conversations over the past several years about ways to provide some relief to boards of education with respect to the various state mandates. There are some specific proposals that are on the table this legislative session that we're very heartened by. What we're looking at are proposals that would allow school districts to provide educational experiences in a more efficient and more effective manner. These are not going to save tens of millions of dollars, but they will allow a better focus on what matters in the classroom. One of those is around the area of professional development. Over the years, there have been a multitude of very specific training requirements that have been incorporated into our professional development statutes. The result is that all of a district's time that's allocated for professional development is devoted to fulfilling those mandates. There is not time to provide the kind of support that our educators need to be more effective in supporting student achievement. We are heartened that there have been many discussions in this building, as well as a proposal that the governor released on Wednesday that would help us streamline those existing mandates and let us use our time most effectively where it's needed with the teachers. There are also other proposals looking at the high school graduation requirements, an issue that has been examined and re-examined for a number of years, and we want to ensure that there is real learning for all students and that we're not focused on seat time, but focused on the learning outcomes. There has also been a proposal to eliminate the municipal spending cap. We think that is a very positive proposal because communities are best able to decide what the level of tax burden is that they are able to sustain. Connecticut is known for our quality education system. We want to make sure that we are able to maintain that quality because that is the key to a successful workforce in the future and a strong state. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Dave, and he'll talk a little more about the teacher pension issue.
Can you give us a quick tutorial on what your organization is again?
Yes, good morning. My name is David Lenahan, and I'm with the Connecticut Association of School Business Officials. We basically are responsible for the financial and many of the operational activities that are performed for schools, including transportation, including cafeteria operations, including, in many cases, facility management. And many of us are also involved in contract negotiations and perform some human resources functions as well. So again, I'm going to speak a little bit more on what Joe had already mentioned in terms of this teacher retirement contribution. This is a major transfer of responsibility from the state to the towns for the payment of roughly 1/3 of the cost of teacher pensions in any one year. This increases, as Joe said, the cost to the towns for just this one item of over $408 million for next year and $420 million for the following year. Joe touched a little bit about it. Currently, teachers pay 6% of their salary into the fund for their pension. And historically, the state has contributed approximately 30% per year, although this was often underfunded at times, and so the balance of the underfunding grew as time went on. Significant impacts to towns and boards of education, increasing expenses, again, for just this one item, from a low of $85,000 for some of our smaller and poorer towns to $17 million, again, depending on the town. Again, just for next year for this impact, if this was to stay where it is. Potential impacts, as Joe mentioned, impact the town, could end up decreasing fund balance, could increase property taxes, obviously could be a reduction in services. Joe mentioned several of them that would affect the boards of ed, potentially affect programs, all-day kindergarten, support services, extracurricular activities, either sports or music and band and that nature, and facility maintenance. There's already been some deferred maintenance going on. This would only exacerbate the problem. The other possibility here would be an increase in class size and obviously staff cuts at the board level. As Joe mentioned and Patrice reiterated, all of our students have needs, and the fact that this particular item really does impact negatively all school systems. Bottom line, our children lose if this was to continue, and as Patrice had indicated, we have a high-quality education system here, and this would only cause further impact in the negative and future successes of our children would would result. So that's all I have to say. We'll open the floor to questions.
The number of about 86,000 currently retired teachers. How many 86,000 currently retired teachers?
Yeah.
What's the approximate number of currently active teachers, public teachers?
Number of teachers?
37,000.
Use that one too. What are the projections in terms of student body? Aren't they trending down? Don't a lot of the towns, don't they have to consider closing schools? Aren't they currently doing that? Isn't the next generation smaller?
Yeah, the projections are outside the cities, over the next 10 years, about a 10% decrease. But let's keep in mind, when you start to see the impact of that on what you spend. Unfortunately, if you take the per pupil amount we get from the state, we don't save that for one kid leaving. You got to get lucky. You got to save a lot. You have to have a lot of kids leaving in a given grade level and a given school to even cut a teacher. If you get really lucky, you can close a school. But just because there's decreasing enrollment doesn't mean there's a commensurate lack of need based on the per pupil allotment from the state. So with decline in enrollment, obviously there's going to be less need for funds, but it's not a one-to-one thing between the kid leaving and the amount of money you get from the state.
Well, you said you understood that the need, of course, is greatest in these 30 communities, which are, we all know, it's Waterbury, it's Hartford, it's Bridgeport, it's New Haven.
Yeah.
I think, we know that the governor is a Keynesian and that he believes that those who are better off should help those who ain't. So how can you argue with that if that's what the governor believes?
We're not arguing. Yeah, well, first of all, we know that the less wealthy towns should get more money from the state than the others do. But the distribution formula that he proposed really exacerbates that situation. In special ed, you've got some communities getting nothing. You've got places like Wallingford getting a $10 million hit. You've got West Hartford, I think, is at somewhere $13 million. That's a big hit in 1 year. If we're going to have the kind of system we ought to have, there's still going to be greater money going to the less wealthy towns. But everybody's got to get something, and everybody's got to get a little more than what he's suggested. Because in every one of those communities, there are kids who have special needs. There are poor kids in all of those communities. You just can't say, well, I'm sorry, we're not going to give you anything.
What's the average cost of a special needs child in a district?
Well, the average cost for regular education is around $13,000, so double that, $26,000. But that's average across the state. In the wealthier towns, by the way, it'll cost more because their teacher salaries are greater. Everything, and in many ways, a lot of their costs are greater. But it's usually twice the amount of a regular ed kid.
David said.
Litigation before the Supreme Court, does this put the state in a better position to make the case that they're adequately meeting, if these changes that the governor proposes are to be implemented, does this put the state in a better position to make the argument that they're where they need to be?
I really don't think so, because what is being alleged by CJEF, and by the way, CABE and CAPS are members of CJEF as well, is that the whole system needs to be changed. It needs to be based on what it takes to give every kid an adequate education. And you're going to weight that for wealth of the community. The proposal so far simply take the present system, which is not based on that at all. It's based on an effort to somehow or another equalize wealth. So I don't think it puts them in a better position. Patrice, do you want to say anything about that?
I definitely agree with Joe. We have to begin with what does it cost to educate a student in Connecticut. And then we have to look at the individual needs of students, which vary greatly. And we have to be able to, and that includes whether they're attending a technical high school or an agricultural program or a traditional public school program. We've got to look at the variation in those needs, and the funding formula has to be responsive to that.
You said that you are involved, your agency is involved with union negotiations. And if you know that, then you know that in union negotiations, you got to give something to get something from labor. Management's got to give something, and vice versa. In order to get the mandate relief you want, you know that you're probably going to have to give up something. Or are you, I mean, because the governor's budget is always a starting point. We all know that.
Yeah.
That this is going to be some sort of a give and take. Is that how you see it? Am I putting it in the right metaphor here?
Yeah, with respect to negotiations, there's, as you said, there's always give and take, and those are on, individual local board levels. If you're talking about kind of a overall negotiation with the state, I think Joe pointed out that, we obviously have a pretty draconian situation here, and that we would hope that, we get back at a minimum to level funding, which is currently in place. So, yeah, there's going to be some give and take, and it's going to take place not only at our levels, but certainly at the legislative level as well.
Would you expect to get the mandate relief that you want and not having some sacrifice in terms of dollars?
I wouldn't make a comparison with collective bargaining negotiations. That's a very different system. What we're talking about is what is the appropriate state policy that supports the education of our children. The mandates issue needs to be addressed because it's not good policy to put so many constraints on how decisions are made in terms of providing appropriate educational programs. The other piece, the funding piece, is what do communities need in order to be able to at least maintain the quality of their education programs. So we don't see it as a negotiations. We're here to talk about good educational policy.
Patrice, can you give us an example of an unfunded mandate?
There are so many. Special education is certainly only partially funded by the state and federal government. Some of those individual placements can cost $250,000. Joe talked about the average cost. That's for a child that's being educated probably in a regular program, regular classroom setting with some support services. But we have students that are in residential placements out of state, and those are very costly. This new proposal doesn't actually address that because while we used to have a real safety net in the excess cost grant, this proposal only provides for some communities a percentage of even those very high-cost placements.
What would you do, for example, if the legislature decided to mandate seatbelts in all school buses?
Well, again, that's a major unfunded mandate. If they want to give us the money to do it, then wonderful. But in that case, it's not just seatbelts. You're going to have to put somebody on the bus to make sure the kids use the seatbelt. So you're talking about a lot of money there. Let me go back to your previous question. If we were really in negotiations, we would be proposing a 4% increase in state funding because we've come off a number of years where the state funding has been level while our costs have gone up. What we're saying here is, again, it's not negotiations. If we can get level funding and mandate relief, then we can continue some of the progress that's been made in the state. And that's really what we're looking for.
What you're talking about here is encountering this right after a mid-year cut to almost everyone, right?
Yeah, that just exacerbates things. I mean, that was a $20 million cut. I think what's happened in most districts is that the town has not been able to go back to the Board of Ed and said, cut your budget, but all of that plays into what the town is willing to give the board in the next year. So it has a cumulative effect.
Proposing in his bill for school construction to have towns and cities pick up more of the cost instead of the 20 to 80 reimbursement, it would be 10 to 70. Do you guys have a feeling about that? And as well as small towns, when they're applying for, there's some incentives there's a reduction if small towns want to build schools if they don't build it with a larger population.
No, go ahead, do that.
Obviously, any reduction when a community is considering a school construction project, one of the major factors the community looks at before they approve that project is what kind of state support they will have and what the burden will be on the community. My bigger concern is probably not new construction, but districts that need to renovate existing buildings. And obviously, renovation can usually be more cost-effective. If their enrollment projections are such that they're going to need those buildings, we need to be able to have safe, healthy places to educate our students and safe, healthy places for our staff to work. And that, the reduction in the sliding scale may inhibit the ability of a community to approve a project.
Any other questions?
The governor is also proposing having towns apply for distressed municipality status to no longer be subject to the to the minimum budget requirement. Is that something you all are supportive of?
Well, we're concerned about anything that removes the minimum budget requirement, because that was put in place to make sure the money that went to the municipalities actually got used for education. And you take that away in situations where, especially where municipal aid is being cut, and you're going to have a situation where the towns, for very understandable reasons, are going to use the money that's coming in for education for other purposes. So we're concerned about that. Other questions? Okay, well, thank you very much for coming, and have a good day.